Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking something truly massive. We are exploring a groundbreaking expansion of a framework known as the OSI 20-layer and entropy spacetime theory. Now, what we're about to dive into is nothing short of a grand unified theory. It's an incredibly elegant framework that takes matter, biology, and human culture and bridges them into one single, continuous, and unbroken system of communication. Seriously, if you've ever found yourself staring at the stars and wondering exactly how the fundamental, cold laws of the physical universe might connect directly to human thought or to societal evolution, well, you are in for a real treat. Let's just dive right in.
So, right off the bat, I want to challenge a fundamental assumption that pretty much all of us have. Is human speech the only language? Think about it. When we hear the word language, our brains instantly picture humans talking, or writing a book, or maybe a programmer typing code on a screen. We have this incredibly human-centric view. But what if that is just a tiny, unbelievably recent fraction of what language actually is? What if the universe itself, the actual physical fabric of reality, has been speaking, communicating, and processing information since the very beginning of time? To answer that, here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll redefine what language actually is. Then, we'll trace the three massive explosions of natural history. From there, we're going to uncover some hidden evolutionary devices, explore the birth of symmetry and otherness, examine what makes a corpus living, and finally, we'll arrive at a completely new, mind-bending definition of spacetime itself.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, a new definition of language, moving way beyond human speech. Our source radically redefines our starting point here. It argues that we shouldn't define language by the presence of human vocal cords or alphabets, but strictly by its function. So language is proposed as any pattern that does three very specific things. First, it identifies differences. Second, it is repeatable. And third, it generates the next state. That's it. Those are the rules. Now, if we apply these highly functional rules, human speech is just one highly evolved iteration of a much larger cosmic phenomenon. Under this definition, matter itself acts as a language. Life acts as a language. They are both actively processing information and generating the next state of reality continuously. And they're doing it utilizing the exact same underlying logic that you and I use when we're just having a conversation.
Moving right along to Section 2, the three explosions of natural history, or the evolution of the corpus.
We typically picture the Big Bang as just this chaotic, massive physical explosion of energy and heat, right? A purely mechanical, dumb event. But our source redefines it as the first massive generation of language patterns. We call this the explosion of the material corpus. Basic particles stepped up in complexity to form atoms. Then, those atoms identified differences, communicated, and combined into molecules, which eventually ignited into stars and ultimately organized into these vast, sprawling galaxies. This wasn't just random physical stuff clumping together in an empty void. This was the universe actively building its foundational dictionary of material patterns. It was establishing the very first vocabulary of existence.
But of course, the universe didn't just stop at rocks and burning gas. Billions of years later, we get the second major explosion, the life corpus. This is where DNA enters the picture as the new underlying communication pattern. And if you think about how DNA actually functions, it perfectly matches our new definition of language. It identifies biological differences. It is highly repeatable through the process of cellular reproduction, and, crucially, through mutation, it generates the next biological state, a process we generally call evolution. So, biological life is quite literally a new, vastly more complex layer of communication, and is stacked directly on top of the physical one.
Eventually, this incredible stacking process leads to the third explosion, which brings us to the symbol corpus. In this layer, abstract signs, symbols, and words become the fundamental patterns. Now, how are these abstract signs actually tied to the real world? They are physically anchored into our biology through what the source calls dopamine grounding. This is fascinating. Our brains literally reward us with neurochemical hits, dopamine, for successfully processing, understanding, and sharing meaning with one another. This powerful biological incentive acts as an engine, driving continuous communication, which then organically aggregates over thousands of years into the massive web of meaning we recognize today as human culture.
Now here is the absolute kicker. These three layers, matter, life, and symbol, are not isolated kingdoms that just happen to exist near each other. They form a deeply cumulative, interconnected history. Life absolutely does not replace matter. It is physically and informationally stacked right on top of it, heavily relying on matter's foundational rules to even exist. By the exact same token, The symbolic realm of human culture doesn't just float around in some magical, disconnected ether. It is strictly, fundamentally grounded in the biology of life. What we are really looking at here is an incredibly elegant, highly interdependent tower of communication protocols, continuously building upon one another.
Okay, let's look at Section 3, Hidden Devices of Evolution, where we do a bit of retrograde analysis.
So, if we look at the core driving mechanisms for the top two layers, they are actually fairly well understood within this framework. The symbol realm runs on that sign dopamine grounding system we just talked about, constantly rewarding the brain for the generation of new meaning. The life realm runs on the DNA reproduction system, propagating genetic information forward through time. But this creates a really profound mystery when we trace this logic backward down the stack. What exactly acts as the DNA for the purely physical material world? What is the core linguistic device that identifies and processes information at the very base layer of reality?
The source proposes a truly fascinating hypothesis to answer this exact question. It's the photon. In this unified theory, a photon is not merely a senseless electromagnetic wave just bouncing blindly around the cold cosmos. No, it is proposed to be the fundamental linguistic component of matter itself. Think of it this way. Just as DNA reads and dictates biological patterns, the photon actively participates in the creation, identification, and destruction of material patterns. It serves as the core linguistic device of the physical universe. It is literally mediating the physical conversation between fundamental particles.
Which brings us to Section 4, the birth of symmetry and otherness, which is essentially the engine of diversity.
Let's consider the deep contrast here between absolute rigidity and functional freedom. Symmetry is the rigid rule of the universe. It's the law ensuring that a hydrogen atom sitting inside your body right now is exactly mathematically identical to a hydrogen atom floating in a galaxy billions of light years away. But if everything in the universe was perfectly rigidly symmetrical all the time, nothing new could ever happen. It would be a perfectly boring universe. The real magic lies in a concept called degenerated state space. It's a heavy physics term, but it essentially just means the freedom allowed within the rules. It's the wiggle room. This freedom permits historical choices to be made, paving the way for the infinite historical diversity we actually see in life, evolution, and language.
And that concept of historical freedom leads us to a radically new definition of the other. Now, the other isn't just a stranger walking down the street. In this unified theory, the other is an entity that shares your common protocol, such as speaking the English language, but remembers entirely different historical selections. They have lived and navigated a completely different path through that allowed state space we just discussed. Because of this, otherness is literally defined as a living memory of broken symmetry. Think about it. You simply cannot generate new meaning by talking to an exact perfect clone of yourself who knows everything you know. True meaning requires this structural, historical difference.
All right, Section 5, the living corpus and the symbolic realm, and how we actually go about igniting meaning.
Picture a book just sitting quietly on a library shelf. In this framework, that book is just a potential corpus. It is essentially dead text. It contains the potential for information, sure, but it isn't doing anything. It only transforms into a living corpus when it actually enters a communication cycle, when it is actively read, aggressively questioned, thoroughly refuted, and reinterpreted by the other. The sheer friction of interacting with a mind that holds completely different historical memories is exactly what breathes life into those dormant symbols and transforms them into active, living meaning.
Notice how beautifully and perfectly this maps across the different layers of reality. Look at biology. What fundamentally drives biological evolution? DNA diversity, right? Without a vast amount of genetic variation, species stagnate. They fail to adapt to changing environments, and they eventually die out. Now look at the symbolic realm of our culture. What drives evolution there? Otherness. Differing perspectives serve the exact same evolutionary function for our culture that genetic mutation and diversity serve for our biology. Generating new, robust, adaptable meaning absolutely requires constant communication and, yes, constant friction with the other.
Finally, we arrive at Section 6, the new emergence of spacetime. Get ready to completely redefine reality here.
According to this theory's OSI 20-layer architecture, every single layer of the universe, whether we are talking about matter, life, or symbol, operates on shared structural features. It's the same blueprint all the way up. They all utilize a shared protocol, which are the rules of interaction. They all rely on an abstract communication cycle, which is the loop of the conversation. And they all experience entropy, which, when we are talking about the symbolic realm, represents that gradient of meaning between you and the other. But that final point on the table is by far the most crucial and the most mind-bending. Space-time is not a fixed, empty, pre-existing box that the universe just happens to sit inside of. Space-time actually emerges directly from these communication cycles.
The source states something incredibly profound here, and I want to make sure we really grasp this. Quote, "Space is the network of meaning vectors. Time is the communication cycle where meaning is updated." Let that sink in. Time is not a fundamental property measured by a ticking mechanical clock on a wall. Time is simply the update of a state. It is the literal duration of a communication cycle from one state to the next. And space is not a giant empty void. It is the relational network of possible communication. To put it bluntly, where there is absolutely no communication occurring, there is no space-time for that specific layer. Period.
So, bringing it all together into one grand unified proposition, nature is a cumulative history of three distinctly stacked explosions of linguistic patterns: matter, life, and symbol. Every single layer operates through its own unique, specialized protocols and communication cycles. Time is simply the abstraction of those cycles updating, and space is the physical and informational network connecting those communications. Ultimately, the engine powering this entire universe relies entirely on the entropy of otherness. It relies on the friction, the stark differences, and the interaction of vastly different historical paths colliding together to generate entirely new realities.
I want to leave you with this final thought. Imagine a world where every single person had the exact same meaning vector. A world where everyone perfectly agreed on absolutely everything, holding the exact same historical memories and the exact same perspectives. In physics, this state is called thermal equilibrium. It's a state of maximum entropy, where everything is completely uniform and absolutely no new work can ever be done. It's essentially heat death. If we ever reached cultural thermal equilibrium without the friction and challenge of the other, new meaning would permanently cease to exist. Diversity, friction, and differing perspectives aren't just polite social concepts. They are the fundamental physics requirements necessary to keep the universe alive, dynamic, and evolving. Think about that the very next time you encounter an idea that profoundly challenges your own. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.